Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, haggling with your merchandise supplier about a 25-cent discount on custom koozies, or else a scrappy upstart, haggling with your roommates about recording your noise rock album in the communal kitchen, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's Good Friday, 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Alvin who drove a Buick Regal with racing tires, who was always trying to sell you a flash drive that he claimed had $100,000 of Dogecoin on it. And old Alvin would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. This year, Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its members on surpassing $100 million in commission-free sales through their websites. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials to our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music in the coming weeks, you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the country, from Arcata, California to Annapolis, Maryland. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show in that way. If you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, there's still a couple ways that you could help out for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store. That's free. Or second, you could tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. This week's show, obviously, is with a living legend, and it was an absolute privilege to have her on our show. Our guest this week is, in my opinion, one of our nation's greatest treasures of a songwriter and a singer. Iris Dement was born in Arkansas, the youngest of 14 children. She was then raised in Orange County, California, among her family's deeply religious Pentecostal community. She found early success with her song, Our Town, which was covered by several other artists and featured on the hit 1990s television show, Northern Exposure. She's recorded for Warner Brothers and Rounder Records. She's been twice nominated for a Grammy Award. In 2017, she was recognized by the Americana Music Association with a Trailblazer Award. An absolutely captivating vocalist, she has duetted with Josh Turner, Emmylou Harris, Steve Earle, Ralph Stanley, and most notably, John Prine, having sung on the latter's iconic ballad, In Spite of Ourselves. Pitchfork says that she frames observations of modern life in timeless American musical forms. In reviewing her latest album, Rolling Stone says that her music has never felt so urgent. I got a chance to catch up with her on the phone a few weeks ago to hear about her amazing musical journey so far. Miss Iris Dement, thank you so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. I have always associated you with the American South, and I guess for good reason, but in getting ready for this podcast, I learned something about you that I didn't know, which was at the age of 3, you moved from Arkansas to Los Angeles, and that's where you spent a lot of your childhood. What did Los Angeles look like culturally and musically for you growing up?
Well, my family moved from Arkansas to Orange County, actually, which when I was 3. And what had happened is my folks had sold the farm, and my dad had taken a factory job in this little town that we lived in Arkansas, in Paragould. My dad went on a 1-year wildcat. He staged a wildcat strike with some of his, coworkers. So my parents committed to that for a year. They had 10 kids at home, and I was the youngest one. A year of standing on a picket line all day long for a solid year. Kids, really, as the way my mom described it, we nearly starved to death. And they didn't get the union. So my dad literally just one day at the end of a shift said, I'm getting in the car with these guys and we're going to California, and we're going to see if we can find work and bring the family out. So that's how we wound up out there. But when you say, what did that look like? Well, my parents, there had been a number of other transplants from their area, Arkansas and the Missouri Bootheel area, that had gone out to Orange County. So they immediately found a church that was pastored by a guy they knew right from their little town in Norwalk Pentecostal First Church of God, and a congregation full of Southern transplants. So I had a lot, definitely in California, but my in-house and my in-church and my main community that my parents locked us in with was a lot of folks that came from, some of them from the Midwest, but a lot of folks from Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri, and, kids I played with. My best friend was from Alabama. So, I don't know what California's like now, but at that time, it was pretty well populated by people who came from, somewhere else. And so there was just a lot of the extension of that culture musically, what we ate, how we looked at the world. And I think my parents, I was their 14th child. My mom, they'd never left, this area that they'd grown up in, and they were very, they just locked in on us, like we weren't allowed to play with some of the neighborhood kids, etc. So I had this very insulated life in a lot of ways. And meanwhile, on weekends, my sisters, once they could drive, we were driving to the beach. So it was this odd mix of, and then I had a sister that married a movie star and moved to Hollywood. Next thing you know, we're going to visit my sister in Hollywood. It was this strange mix of things. But in the home, my parents were solid, fundamentalist, Christian, fried chicken, just very Southern. So
looking back at that as an adult and understanding how almost cloistered you were as a family, what's your relationship like that with that as an adult? Are you glad that your folks did that? Or do you look back and think to yourself, wow, I would have actually liked some more of the general culture in my life at that age?
Wow, what an interesting question. I think, I could answer that from my memories as being a kid, or I can answer it from where I stand now. At the time, the main thing which is, I think, the main thing in any child's life. I felt really secure. That was really, I knew my folks were looking after me. I knew they were rock solid. And I had all these older siblings that were on my team and looking after me. So that, and I loved church, church was amazing and wonderful. I mean, I didn't want to go to school ever. I always wanted to go to church. There was just a lot of life. The music was incredible. Just lots of passion, all the things that make us thrive. There was a lot of that there, and I caught on to that at a young age and loved it. So, and I was fortunate in that my parents didn't try to prevent us, like in terms of music, any kind of music that, I mean, I listened to all the radio music. My older siblings brought in, popular records. My parents weren't, that you hear a lot of that, breaking the records and
Right.
burning the books and the records. It didn't come from that. My parents didn't seem to be afraid of, non-religious influences in that regard. So, in some ways it wasn't cloistered, but, when I look back on it now, I mean, I don't know. You get formed and you do the best you can with what you got. And I'm happy with what I did with what I got. So, you can't separate that stuff out. You get some good stuff, some bad stuff, and you try to make the best of it. And I felt very loved, and I got a lot of great music, and a lot of solid human beings were in my life. So I did all right. They did.
You had this love affair with music and the church, and music within the church. And we know now that music has become, your calling and your life's work. But at what point did you decide as a kid or a teen or a young adult that music was calling you in a particularly insistent way, that this might be something that you were going to make a life's work out of? When did that first occur to you?
I don't know that it ever did. I always, like I said, just loved and thrived, and I was just so surrounded by it from day one that I never had like a separate view, and in the churches everybody sang, but it wasn't like nobody had careers, you just sang in the choir, you sang in specials, you sang around the house, you sang at events, and that was just something you did, and it was part woven into just everyday life. And so I never thought of music outside of that, like as a profession, and then when I grew up and left the church, it never occurred to me. I would still play the piano and dream about writing a song. I hadn't seen, I hadn't gone to concerts or shows. I didn't know there were singer-songwriter people that sat and played an instrument and made up songs. I was very I didn't put those, I realized I was exposed to that. Sure, I had my Joni Mitchell, Carole King records and all that, but I didn't really make the connection. I was just a listener, I wasn't studying them and trying to pick apart what they were up to and how they got there. I was just loving the songs, and you know what I mean? I didn't have that view. So it wasn't until I was 25 that I realized this is what I was going to do. And it was a bit of a mystical thing. I mean, I pause sometimes to say this, but it's just a fact, the way it came to me. I always wanted to write songs since as far back as I can remember. But again, I didn't think of it in a professional context. You know what I mean? It was just like, I remember my mom, when I was 5, she had a Loretta Lynn record. Well, my dad brought it home, a little canary yellow suitcase record player and a couple of records. And one of them was Loretta Lynn singing the hymns. And I remember being in the living room, my mom and I were singing along to that. And my mom pausing and saying to me, "Ours, that's just how it was." And my mom was from Arkansas. And it was a song Loretta Lynn was singing about a little one-room country school. That's where I learned to pray, in a church without a steeple. And it's this song about how the church doubled as the school.
Mhm.
You know, it was school Monday through Friday. And mom, I remember her saying, that's just how it was, Iris. That's just how it was. And that's my first memory of a flash into there's this thing called songwriting. And I remember looking at Loretta Lynn's picture. I was so little and thinking, she's never been to our house. I know this. And she knows my mom. And I was just like, I can tell you, I can paint the scene in that room. How does she know my mom? And then I remember flipping the record and looking, this person wrote this. But I can also remember something connected that I saw something really beautiful happen to my mom in that moment. She just woke up in this way that I hadn't really seen her. There was this joy and there was something different in her. And there was this joy and satisfaction that this woman had done something that had linked her and me closer together. You know what I mean? Like I felt like I knew my mom in a way that I didn't know 3 minutes earlier. And I was just really intrigued by that. And I think and obviously I didn't at the moment think, oh, I want to grow up and be a songwriter. But that something opened up there, that a little door that never got closed again.
Well, it's very informative to me knowing that story, having followed your career and listened to your music for so long, because it speaks to an underlying reason. So many people get into music and entertainment for reasons that are, let's say, secondary to the song. And that's fine. They want the trappings of playing a show. They want, you can make some money doing it. And that's great. And that's fine. And I don't begrudge anyone that. Mm-hmm. That being said, what you're talking about is a primal and an initial connection with like the purpose of the song, not even like the craft of the song, but the purpose. And the purpose of the song was connection. And the purpose of the song was to have some sort of edifying effect on somebody that you loved, and your career makes a lot of sense in light of that kind of formation story there.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's ever, approached that with me, or that I've ever really thought about it, but it that was a big deal, and I locked in with it, and I still am locked in with it. I don't mean to not craft, don't get me wrong, but
sure. And yes, and I didn't mean it. No, I'm just talking about the initial.
But yeah, yes. My drive is that I'm trying to make that happen. That thing that happened between my mom and I by way of this third party.
Yeah.
It was just wonderful. And that's what I've continued to try to make happen with my music, with my songs.
Now, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or not, or how true it is, but the legend is that you're, in your mid-20s, and that you're able to write your first very notable song, Our Town, which has been covered by many people since. That song just kind of fell out of you, almost fully formed, ready to go, and that puts you on your current trajectory professionally that you are now. Is that true? And if it is, or if it isn't, can you kind of describe that initial genesis of that first very notable song that you wrote?
That is absolutely true. I was 25, and my mom, if she were here, she'd tell you I would sit at the piano when I was a kid, sometimes an hour before going to school, and she'd have to run me out the door. I wanted to write a song. I'm not exaggerating. I never put more than 2 lines together. We're talking a really long time. I don't know why. I just couldn't. I was looking for something that just didn't show up, and I couldn't figure out what are people doing here. I just couldn't. And I wasn't one to just start scribbling things on a piece of paper. That probably would have been a good idea. I don't know why I didn't do that. I just kept waiting for God, or some. There was something had to strike me, and it just kept not striking me. And decades went by, and I got really discouraged, and I'd given up on it. But that is true. When I wrote Our Town, I had borrowed my brother's guitar. I'd gone down to Oklahoma to visit my brother. I didn't have a guitar, and I only knew 2 chords at that. But I just asked him if I could borrow his guitar. And as the story goes, I passed through some little town coming back, I was living in Topeka, Kansas at the time. And I saw this town, and it's just something, there was this moment of inspiration. I just could see this vision of the history of this place on an emotional level. And I went home, and that week I wrote 2 other songs, and I don't remember them. I remember like nothing about them. But when I say 2 songs, I had a verse, a chorus, and another verse. One of them I played for my brother, and he said, "Oh, that's such and such." It was somebody else's song. So I don't count that one. The second one I don't remember. And then one day I was just in my room and strumming the 2 or 3 chords I kind of sort of knew. And Our Town just came rolling in, and it was like that. I had to just write it down as fast as it came. And then when I finished writing down all the words, crouching down on the floor, scribbling on my scrap paper, I keep in mind, I grew up with just a lot of, church, spiritual stuff. And I had these stories planted in my head, and I had been told since I was a kid, God will talk to you, the spirits are out here, they're going to get a hold of you. I believed all that, even though I'd left the church. And it happened for me, maybe it happened because I just needed for it to happen. Maybe it happened because these things happen. I don't know. I don't care. But I finished that song, and it felt like somebody walked in the room and they said, "There you have it, Iris." That was exactly there you have it, Iris. And I understood what that meant. That's what you're going to do. You got what you've been begging for. Now go. And that's what I did. I had to learn how to play a few more chords. I had to figure out how to overcome just debilitating shyness, insecurity that I still have massive amounts of. But I knew it was a done deal, and no matter what, that's what I was going to do. And I don't understand the ins and outs of these things, but I know myself well enough to know that if something like that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have ever gotten out the door. I had to have that. I had to have something happen that made me believe, the spirit world was upon me. I just was too insecure to move forward without it.
Yeah.
But it happened, and it's gotten me through.
It's interesting because what you're describing is like this precious gift that you almost were saying was just kind of laid in your lap. And yet, it was a gift that required much of you. It was a gift that you've had to spend the rest of your life living up to in a way. And so it's not like a gift that you would give a child. It's just something fun that they can play with. And it only gives to them, like this was a gift that would come into your life and be a great boon for you. It gave you your ticket to the dance, so to speak. But also, once you get into the dance, you had to learn how to dance. Like you said, you had to stop being as shy as you were, or learn how to control that, impulse of your personality. That speaks to me of a true gift, something that requires something of you as well.
Oh, yeah. It requires something. I still never go out on stage that I'm, this is a stretch, but many times I've said this before, and it's true. I couldn't even tell you how many times I'd rather have been run over by a bus than go out on stage. Like, that's how I feel. Like, can I go out that back door and get hit by a car? It can be that hard for me. I don't have that thrill of being seen.
Mm-hmm.
I do have the thrill of being heard. That's different. I feel like I have something. I couldn't do this if I didn't believe that I have something that needs to be heard and is good for people. All the people? No, but there's some people out there.
Yeah.
And I believe I have something that's of value that can feed their lives and strengthen them. And it strengthens me. And that's what gets me over that. And I think that's one reason I haven't written a lot of songs, because I have to have I have to have a song that'll do that for me to overcome, you know what I mean? All the other stuff we just talked about.
Indeed.
I can't go out there with fluff. I have to have something that I have enough confidence in and believe in the power of, that it'll force me to step up into a realm that isn't my comfort zone or whatever.
One of my favorite tune of yours is, and I've had a hard time finding it on the different streaming services and stuff like that. When I want to listen to it, I go to YouTube to watch you play it, of all places. So, but it's that tune of yours, Could It Be the Kingdom Has Already Come? And so did that tune come to you in that? It strikes me as, it sounds like it did come to you in that way, but can you describe the writing of that? And was it similar to Our Town in that respect?
I love that song, and nobody ever has asked me about that song.
I love that song.
I do it live. No one's ever been like, woohoo, and I still just keep doing it. That's another thing. People have asked me, do you take your songs out to check with the crowd? And I don't. I'm like, I check with me. And if my spirit or whatever says this, I just do it. I just take it out. And that's one of them. No one's ever said anything about that song. But, well, I mean, I remember when that song started, my life was kind of coming apart. I was getting a divorce and I was out doing shows all by myself. As in get in the car, drive, and it was the dead of winter and I drove to Bemidji and, where they like 15-foot tall Paul Bunyan greet you, when you come to town. 10-foot snowbanks, and just, it was a bad time of life. But long and short of it is I did sound check and then they put me in this dressing room. I won't drag you through, but I just started to kind of come apart. I thought, I can't breathe. And I'd never had that happen to me. I was like, I got to get out of here. I got to go. And I just had to leave. I think I told him I had a migraine. Like I could not comprehend how I could go stand in front of people that night. And so I'm not proud of that, but that's how it went. Unfortunately, that's the only time that's ever happened to me. But I went back to the hotel and I just felt so bad about walking out on that crowd, and I thought I've got to do something. And I sat down and looked out the window and I saw this tree outside the window, in the cold winter, there's a tree outside my window. It sings when the wind blows. So I wrote my memories, I wrote that chorus and that first verse and then added to it from there, and as is often the case, the rest of it took me a few years.
A few years, really? So you had like that nugget of a
my
song.
songs do, yeah.
Really, and you'll just let those other pieces roll in as they roll in, rather than.
I've learned to do that. I used to be really worried about that. Back like when I was on labels and that whole, when I was younger, it's like, oh, you got to put out something every year. You're going to lose your crowd, which is true. I've lost many, crowd over the years, but I don't know. I want to write songs that I believe in. And if it means losing my crowd, it means losing my crowd. That's the direction I decided to go with this. But I've learned over the years to trust that. Some things you just have to hammer away at. You just have an instinct, it's there. I just got to hammer away. Some things you just know, you just got to live a little more. And again, when I was younger, I wasn't sure. Is this me knowing that I need to live a little bit more? Is this me being lazy? Mm-hmm. But I've gotten past that. I think it's the former more often than not. And so I just trust that. So I usually just, I have a basket over there. A lot of the songs that were on this last record, some of them pieces were like 10 years old. And then just something clicked one day and the thing became what it needed to become. So I don't worry about that anymore.
Talk to me then about those years when it did feel like a little bit more of a pressure, because in the 90s, you did have a cup of coffee with like the capital M, capital B music business. You know what I mean? Like Infamous Angel came out, very notable debut record. Let the Mystery Be is on there. It's been covered a lot by a lot of different artists. Then My Life comes out in '94. It's nominated for a Grammy. What were those years like in the '90s when you were? You've already alluded to it a little bit. Like, was it pressure filled working for labels and trying to get these things done? And how did you deal with that pressure?
Well, that's kind of a interesting thing to think about because there are multiple layers going on here. For example, I was young, and you have this energy, when you're in your 30s that I don't have now, and drive. It's so whether I was doing music or something else, that time of your life, nature, our wiring is such that we know get in there and figure out what you're going to do and do it. Now's your time. So some of it was just that I wanted to accomplish something, and I was at that physical peak and all that stuff, and that was exciting to feel like I was being challenged and pushing myself. It's a great time to have in life, and I'm glad I had that. And then there were other layers to that. Sure, I had a contract with a record label. I didn't feel like direct verbal, pressure, but you signed on a dotted line, you'd do X. So you'd kind of like to come through and do X. And it's a ball that just gets rolling. You have an agent, they'd kind of like to stay on the job. You have fans that are writing to you. When's your new record come out? When's your new record out? You bump into people on the street. What are you writing? It's like suddenly everything becomes about this in this way that I don't know. That's one reason I left Nashville. It's like, I don't want that to be the thing in my life. Like songs. Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting a little off track here, but
You're not at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like going back to that thing with my mom, We're in the house and we're doing everyday things. She's cooking and cleaning, I'm being a kid. Here comes the song, and it touches us. I didn't want it to be the reverse where the song was everything and life was this. And I knew I wouldn't be able to do my work that way either. I would have started writing songs that didn't mean anything to me. So as fate had it, I just had to have a lot more life to get a few good songs, and that's the way I went. But so I don't know. That's a time in my life. It was a mix of things, age and energy, and I'm glad it went the way it did. But overall, I did, when I could see it starting to harm me, and I could see the writing on the wall that if I kept that up, I wasn't going to write the songs that I wanted to write, and I was probably going to burn out. And so I very consciously pulled back. I distinctly remember when I did, and things started shifting in a big way. And I started playing smaller rooms, all that just went like that. But I never regretted it. I didn't want. I knew that this was a job, but I knew that I wasn't the type person that wanted or was willing to cross over all the way into that realm. That I had to balance that.
Was it scary when you made that switch?
Yeah, it was scary. It was scary. And yeah. It was things like, I remember, I don't know, if I'm talking too much, you might want to just shut
This is what podcasts are for. This is so that you can talk too, quote unquote, too much. No, please, this is.
Well, I remember touring the UK, and at that time I was playing big rooms. They were big to me, like, I could be wrong, but like 800 to 1,500 people were coming out. Like, how did that happen? I don't know, but there they were. And I was trying to learn how to perform. I'd never done a show before my first record came out. Just a little background here. I had never done a show. I'd sang like 3, and then suddenly I had a tour. I didn't know what a show was. And I had so few songs in my repertoire, I would sing songs twice. So I was like as green as you can get, more or less as far as, I mean, I did a few open mics, and that was it. So everything was, I was trying to figure out all of it. But I don't know, maybe it was 95. I don't know. I lose track of time. I don't remember the years, oddly enough, of this. 5, 6, maybe. But I do remember I'd had this string of really successful shows, lots of people were coming out, people were really happy. And I got into this thing, I was saying exactly the same thing every night. I thought, well, that's what you do, and you do the show. And I guess I'd kind of gotten good at it, just judging from the response, the crowd, they laughed at all the right places and all that stuff that you're going for. And I remember one night at the end of the show, I walked off and I just thought, like the crowd, they were on their feet just roaring. And I thought, I'd rather be dead. I feel like a shell of a human. What happened? Like, something's got to give. And in that moment, I just realized, even if I lose all my fans, I'm not doing this. I felt like my life was just drained out of me, and I was just sort of like an entertainer.
Yeah.
There's nothing against entertainers, but that's not my thing. That's not what that's not what is moving out of my core here. I wasn't put here to do that. If you're put here to do that, yay, That wasn't me. And I'd kind of gone over to that. I just remember wanting to throw my guitar, which is really not me, but I really just wanted to throw it like these rock and roll, bad dude guys. That's how I felt. And I immediately started changing things up after that. I just said, I have to show up. If I can't speak from a place that feels connected to my soul, then I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And if people go home unhappy, they go home unhappy. But I'm not going to be, what's the word for it? I've got to stay connected to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, my soul. And I've got to communicate with people authentically, even if it means there's only 5 people in the room. We will have something real that'll go on between us. And there was a price to pay for that, but I would pay it all over again. It's kept me intact. That's what I needed to do. Not everybody needs to do that, obviously. I did.
Well, also sounds like it was a cheaper price than having to violate your conscience. So
right.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. After her initial success, Iris Dement felt like she was working at a creative pace that did not suit her. Instead of conforming herself to that process, she conformed the process to herself. She moved from Nashville. And as you'll hear from our conversation, that was not the easiest career decision to make. There have been repercussions for that decision. Her listeners, though, are glad that she made it because it has allowed her output to remain pristine. Thinking about her making that transition on the business front got me thinking of a Charles Bukowski poem entitled, "Hell is a Closed Door." Even when starving, the rejection slips hardly even bothered me. I only believed that the editors were truly stupid, and I just went on and wrote more and more. I even considered rejects as action. The worst was the empty mailbox. If I had a weakness or a dream, it was that I only wanted to see one of those editors who rejected me, to see his or her face, the way that they dressed, the way they walked across a room, the sound of their voice, the look in their eye. Just one. Look at one of them. You see, when all you look at is a piece of printed paper telling you that you aren't very good, then there is a tendency to think that the editors are more godlike than they are. Hell is a closed door when you're starving for your goddamn art, but sometimes you feel at least like having a peek through the keyhole. Young or old, good or bad, I don't think anything dies as slow and as hard as a writer. I would be remiss if I didn't ask about your legendary association. And I'm assuming it started when you were in Nashville with John Prine. You worked with him for many years. You did many records together. You guys toured together quite a bit. When did you first meet him, and what was that creative relationship like in your life?
Well, I became acquainted with John through Jim Rooney. So Jim Rooney produced my first record and several others. He co-produced this last one. And he was friends with John. So when I made Infamous Angel, nobody knew about me, and Jim knew John. And he said, would you mind if I give John the demo or whatever it is, before it was in the record packaging, all that, and let John Prine listen to it. This may seem really surprising to you, but I knew of John, but this is how kind of out of the whole singer-songwriter world I was. I knew, I knew the Bonnie Raitt song and a couple of other things, but I wasn't that, I don't know that I ever told John this, but I wasn't that familiar enough to know, he's John Prine, but so anyhow, Jim gave that, the recording to John, and John loved it, and he wrote the liner notes for my record and wrote about the pork chops making him cry and all that stuff. And then not long after that I met him, and I was doing an album release show at the Bluebird. That would have been February of 92, maybe January of 92, something like that. I went down there to do a little, I don't know if they still do that, but it used to be a thing, the record release show. And it was this little tiny room. I was a nervous wreck, and John came in and he stood at the back of the little tiny room by the sound control, table, thinking he was being all tucked away. But as it happens, everyone else was sitting down. He was the only human standing up, and he was directly in front of me. By then, I knew a little bit about John Prine. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm a nervous wreck already. He and I are eye to eye. We're the only, phew. So that was my first meeting. And I remember I wore my wedding dress because I had nothing back then. I was so broke. And my wedding dress was just a dress, but it was like the nicest thing I had. So my mind, it was just a weird deal. I don't know. What am I trying to tell you? That's the first time I met John. And then shortly after that, he started asking me to come out and open his shows, and I just never stopped.
What would you say you took away from him creatively, either from the shows or creatively on the record making side? What are some things you took away from working with him, if any?
What did I take away from John? That I don't want to just blurt out anything. I want to think about that. I think I'm going to think about that, but
we'll circle back around.
One of the things that I don't know if this is what I took away from John thing, but one thing that I always felt, and I felt an affinity with him over when we sang, and when I'd watched almost every show I ever did. I stood and watched the whole show. I did a lot of watching John Prine, but I remember when I'd sing with him that I think one thing we had in common is, I don't know how you put it. It was never just John, and it was never just me. I felt like everybody that ever knew and loved us was on that stage with us. It was a very communal sense when I sang with John. And that doesn't always happen. I felt like John's presence in the world and what he was doing was so entrenched in the human community. And there was a consciousness of that. And I relate to that. And singing with him was just one of the most wonderful things I have ever done. And it will never happen again. And I think that was a big part of it. We never talked about it, but I think that was sort of an understood thing that, yeah, it's my name, it's his name. But I think we both carried a lot of people. And it's pretty.
Talk to me about this latest record, Working on a World. It sounds like Working on a World might still be sitting on a hard drive somewhere, the demos and basic tracks, had it not been for Pieta Brown kind of teasing this project out of you a year or two ago. How did the project start, and how did it get finished, this latest record?
Well, the project started because Jim Rooney called me one day. When was this? A couple of years before COVID, maybe? And he was working on a record that I think should be out now. If not now, then very soon. A tribute record to Nancy Griffith, and she was still with us at that time. And of course, I was more than happy to do that. Nancy had been very good to me when I was starting out, took me on a long tour and sang my praises for months on end. And she was a big influence. So, of course, I was happy to do that. And then I thought, I have a handful of songs laying around, not thinking about a record. I just thought I should record, these songs that I love. And some of them were covers and some were mine, just have them. So we added a day or two. Well, the next thing you know, by the time we were done, we had like 10 songs. And he and I were kind of not on the same page about it. He saw it as a record, and it wasn't for what I'm looking for. So I just shelved it. And then I'd made a couple of records with Richard Bennett, the genius Richard Bennett, that hopefully you're aware of, and who's also a good friend. So he and I went in, we did a handful more. They sounded good, same thing, but it just wasn't there, I wanted this body that came together, all the parts coming together in a certain way that just wasn't happening for me. And so and then COVID, just everything kept getting in the way. And I just thought, forget about it. I also thought, I'm 60. Who really cares? I've got grandkids, great grandkids. This isn't necessary. And so I was kind of just in this, zone, like, how hard should I push? Is this? But yeah, one day, Pieta asked me if she could listen to all the recordings. So I had to round them up. They were like 3 or 4 different places. I didn't really even know what we had. And yeah, she listened through, and I think a lot of it was I needed somebody to come in there in a guttural, just human instinct sort of way, outside of just to get in there with me in that way. And she and I are good friends. So I needed that, and she was able to provide that. And I could feel her enthusiasm. She says, "You do have a record, and it's called Working on a World." I mean, that hadn't occurred to me. So that, I don't know, it just tipped me over enough to be able to step back and look at what I had. And I still didn't feel it was a record, because it still wasn't. So I wrote 3 more songs after that. And then I rewrote some of the things we recorded. I added some pieces. Mahalia was not done in my mind, so I added that bridge to Mahalia. Just a handful of things like that. So yeah, I mean, she was very instrumental in that sense. Jim, Richard Bennett is, I don't say that lightly. He's a genius. He's an incredible musician, incredible arranger. Yeah.
Well, sometimes we need our friends to be more enthusiastic about our work in the moment than we are ourselves to push it along. So it's great that you have those friends.
And you never know where that's going to come from, And there it was. So,
well, we're glad that it's here. We're glad that you found it necessary to finish the record and put it together. Congratulations on it. And thank you dearly for being a part of the Working Songwriter Podcast.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed visiting with you.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Iris Dement's latest album is entitled Working on a World, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.